let me tell you about the day we learned that underestimating humans might just be the universe's most expensive mistake. I'm Vorthak, Senior Administrative Officer at the Galactic Defense Academy, and I've seen approximately 14,000 species attempt our combat trials. Most fail spectacularly. Some fail quietly. A precious few actually pass. Then there was Zephira Blackwood. Now, before you get any ideas about human exceptionalism, let me paint you the proper picture here. The Galactic Defense Academy doesn't exactly roll out the welcome mat for every species that stumbles into our sector. We're talking about the premier military institution in 7 galaxies, where the Korthaki battle masters train alongside Veltrani stealth specialists and Nexonian tactical geniuses. The entrance requirements alone would make most civilizations weep into their primary atmospheric gases. So when Earth's application landed on my desk 3 cycles ago, accompanied by what they laughingly called military credentials, well, let's just say the laughter echoed through the administrative halls for weeks. Their so-called elite forces couldn't even manipulate gravitational fields. They still used projectile weapons that required actual ammunition, chemical propulsion for space travel. It was like watching children play with sticks while claiming to be engineers. But regulations are regulations, and every species gets their shot at the trials, even the laughably primitive ones. Zephira Blackwood arrived on Transport 7 Alpha, looking exactly like what you'd expect from a species that hadn't even mastered basic energy manipulation. Average height by human standards, which made her positively tiny compared to our Korthaki instructors. Brown hair pulled back in some sort of functional arrangement. Dark eyes that seemed to catalogue everything around her with unsettling precision. She wore their standard military uniform, which appeared to be made from actual fabric rather than adaptive nanomaterials. The other recruits gave her the usual once-over that new species receive. A few snickers from the Zelthan delegation, some eye-rolling from the Korthaki representatives. The Veltrani, being naturally polite, simply pretended she didn't exist. Commander Thane, our trial coordinator, approached her with the kind of patronizing smile usually reserved for particularly slow children. Miss Blackwood, I trust you understand the nature of our combat evaluation process. I've read the materials, she replied, her voice carrying none of the nervous energy we typically see from untested species. No trembling, no excessive deference, just calm acknowledgement. Thane's smile widened. Excellent. You'll be facing 6 of our instructors in a standard elimination scenario. The trial zone covers approximately 12 square kilometers of varied terrain. Your objective is simple: survive for 30 minutes without being tagged by instructor weapons. What he didn't mention, because it seemed obvious to everyone except apparently humans, was that no recruit had ever lasted more than 8 minutes. The record holder was a Nexonian tactical prodigy who managed 7 minutes and 43 seconds before instructor Korthak tagged him with a neural disruptor. The instructors themselves seemed almost bored as they prepared for the trial. Korthak, our primary combat specialist, stood nearly 3 meters tall with 4 arms and enough natural armor plating to stop a plasma cannon. He'd been teaching combat techniques since before Earth had even invented written language. Instructor Vex, our Veltrani stealth expert, possessed natural camouflage abilities that made her virtually invisible in any environment. The other 4 represented the finest tactical minds from their respective species. Against them stood one small human female with no apparent special abilities, no enhanced physiology, and equipment that wouldn't have impressed a Zelthan merchant. The betting pools, naturally, focused on how quickly she'd be eliminated. The most optimistic odds gave her 2 minutes. The realistic ones suggested 30 seconds. As the trial zone activated and Zephira stepped into the starting area, I found myself almost feeling sorry for her. Almost. After all, someone had to learn that the universe doesn't hand out participation trophies. The trial zone hummed to life with its usual efficiency, holographic terrain materializing into a perfect replica of the notorious Korthaki battlegrounds. Rocky outcroppings, dense vegetation clusters, and strategic choke points spread across the landscape like a tactical nightmare designed by someone with a particularly cruel sense of humor. I settled into the observation deck, with my standard issue failure documentation already pulled up on my datapad. After 14,000 trials, you develop certain expectations about how these things proceed, especially when the recruit in question belongs to a species that still thinks stealth technology means painting things green. The chronometer started its countdown. 30 minutes on the clock. 6 instructors positioned strategically throughout the zone. 1 human female standing in the center clearing, looking around with what could charitably be described as mild interest. 3, 2, 1. The trial began. What happened next was, well, let's call it predictably disappointing. Zephira immediately stumbled. Not gracefully, mind you. Not in some clever tactical maneuver that might fool anyone with half a brain. She genuinely, authentically tripped over her own feet while attempting to move toward the nearest cover. Her weapon clattered against the rocks as she went down in a tangle of limbs that would have been embarrassing for a newly hatched Zelfan infant. The observation deck erupted in the kind of polite chuckling that civilized species use when witnessing inevitable disasters. Commander Thane shook his head with the weary resignation of someone who had seen this exact scenario play out countless times before. 2 minutes, muttered Dr. Nexus, our academy physician. I'll give her 2 minutes before Korthak puts her out of her misery. I was feeling generous. 3 minutes? She might accidentally find some decent cover while fleeing in panic. Through the monitoring system we watched Instructor Korthak advance with the casual confidence of a predator approaching wounded prey. His forearms moved with practiced efficiency, checking his neural disruptor while maintaining perfect situational awareness. Behind him, Instructor Vex shimmered into near invisibility, her Veltrani camouflage making her little more than a heat distortion in the air. Zephira, meanwhile, had managed to untangle herself from her spectacular fall and was now attempting to climb behind a boulder that wouldn't have provided adequate cover for a particularly small rodent. Her movements were clumsy, desperate, and thoroughly human in their complete lack of tactical sophistication. "Oh, this is painful to watch," Commander Thane muttered, already reaching for his evaluation forms. "Should we consider implementing some sort of preliminary screening process? Something to filter out species that haven't mastered basic motor coordination?" The answer came exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds into the trial. Instructor Korthak's voice crackled through the communications system, with the satisfied tone of someone completing a particularly easy assignment. Target eliminated. Neural disruptor contact confirmed. Trial terminated. A collective sigh of relief swept through the observation deck. Not because anyone had been particularly invested in Zephira's success, you understand, but because watching that level of incompetence was starting to become genuinely uncomfortable, like watching someone repeatedly walk into a transparent barrier while insisting it doesn't exist. Instructor Vex confirmed the elimination, with her usual professional efficiency. Visual confirmation of target incapacitation. Human female is down and unresponsive. Standard neural disruptor effects observed. Dr. Nexus was already preparing the medical assessment protocols. "I'll handle the recovery procedures. Standard unconsciousness duration for humans should be approximately 15 minutes. Nothing a basic neural flush won't handle." I began filling out the failure documentation with practiced efficiency. Species designation, human. Result, eliminated in first encounter. Recommendation, significant additional training required before consideration for advanced programs. Probable outcome, return to species of origin with standard better luck next time documentation. Through the zone monitors we could see Zephira's motionless form behind her inadequate boulder cover. Instructor Korthak was already moving to secure the area while the other instructors maintained their positions. Standard post-elimination protocol, executed with the kind of professional boredom that comes from successful routine. "Well," Commander Thane said, sealing his evaluation pad with an air of finality, "that was exactly as expected. I almost feel bad for them. Earth's military representatives seem so optimistic about her potential." "Optimism," I replied while transmitting the failure codes to the Central Academy database, "is rarely a substitute for actual capability. Though I'll admit she took the elimination with more grace than most. No screaming, no demands for trial review, no claims of instructor misconduct. Indeed, Zephira had accepted her defeat with what appeared to be remarkable dignity. No tantrums, no protests, no desperate attempts to claim the neural disruptor had malfunctioned or that the trial conditions were unfair. Just quiet, unconscious acceptance of her obvious limitations. It was almost refreshing, really. Most failed recruits spent considerable energy explaining why their failure wasn't actually failure, but rather some sort of conspiracy or equipment malfunction or atmospheric interference that had prevented them from demonstrating their true abilities. Humans apparently possessed at least enough wisdom to recognize when they were thoroughly outclassed. The paperwork was already processing through Academy systems when the first communication anomaly occurred. The first sign that something might be slightly amiss with our perfectly routine failure documentation came exactly 7 minutes after trial termination, when Instructor Korthak failed to respond to standard post-elimination check-in protocols. Korthak, report status? Commander Thane spoke into his communication device with the mild irritation of someone whose afternoon routine had been disrupted by minor technical difficulties. Silence. Probably checking the human for injuries, Dr. Nexus suggested, though his tone carried the faint uncertainty that medical professionals develop when dealing with species they've never actually treated before. You know how thorough Korthak can be with post-trial assessments. I nodded absently, while updating my failure documentation. Standard procedure. He'll report when he's finished cataloging whatever passed for combat strategy in that performance. 3 more minutes passed. Still no response. Commander Thane tried again, this time with the slightly sharper tone reserved for instructors who had apparently forgotten that communication protocols existed for excellent reasons. Instructor Korthak, respond immediately. Academy regulations require status confirmation within 10 minutes of trial completion. The communication system offered nothing but the sort of static that typically indicates either equipment malfunction or someone deliberately ignoring their superior officers. Vex, Thane continued, switching channels to our Veltrani stealth specialist. Locate Instructor Korthak and report his status immediately. Another pause, another stretch of empty static. Dr. Nexus looked up from his medical preparation protocols with the expression of someone who had just realized that his carefully organized afternoon might be developing unexpected complications. 2 instructors failing to respond. That's unusual. Unusual was putting it mildly. In my 14,000 trials of administrative experience, instructors had never failed to respond to direct communication, ever. The closest we'd come to communication issues was when Instructor Zalthor had temporarily forgotten to switch his translator matrix back to standard Galactic after conducting a trial in his native Nexonian battle language. Commander Thane activated the zone-wide communication system with the kind of authority that suggested someone was about to receive a very unpleasant performance review. All instructors, report status immediately. This is not a request. The response was comprehensive and thoroughly disturbing. Absolute silence from all 6 instructor positions. Zone monitoring. Thane barked at the technical staff. Visual confirmation on all instructor locations. Now. The main display screen flickered to life, showing 6 different camera angles throughout the trial zone. What we saw made approximately 0 sense according to any reasonable understanding of how combat trials were supposed to function. Instructor Korthak, all 3 meters and 4 arms of him, was lying motionless behind a cluster of rocks, approximately 50 meters from where he had supposedly eliminated our human recruit. His neural disruptor lay beside him unused. His communications equipment blinked with incoming messages that he was apparently incapable of answering. Medical emergency? Dr. Nexus announced, already reaching for his emergency response protocols. Korthak appears to be unconscious, but that was just the beginning of our rapidly expanding collection of impossibilities. Instructor Vex, our supposedly invisible Veltrani stealth expert, was discovered hanging upside down from a tree branch in Sector 7, not hiding, not camouflaged. Hanging, unconscious, her equipment scattered on the ground below her like someone had methodically removed every piece of tactical gear she carried and arranged it in a neat pile. How? Commander Thane asked with the slow, careful pronunciation of someone whose understanding of reality was undergoing serious structural damage. Does a Veltrani stealth specialist end up unconscious in a tree? The question became significantly more pressing, as our camera sweep revealed the remaining 4 instructors in similarly impossible situations. Instructor Malthan, our Zelthan tactical expert, was found sitting peacefully against a boulder, with his hands zip-tied behind his back using what appeared to be standard human military restraints. His expression suggested he was experiencing the kind of deep, restful sleep usually associated with powerful sedatives. Instructor Gorvan lay motionless in a drainage ditch, covered by his own camouflage netting in a way that suggested someone with excellent attention to detail had taken considerable care to ensure his comfort, while rendering him completely incapacitated. The remaining 2 instructors were discovered in states of unconsciousness that defied both tactical logic and basic physics. One had somehow been positioned inside a supply container that should have been impossible to access without explosives. The other was found floating face down in the zone's decorative water feature, breathing normally but showing no signs of conscious awareness. 6 instructors, I said slowly, checking and rechecking my monitoring displays because surely there had been some sort of massive technical malfunction. All unconscious, all incapacitated, all positioned in locations that make absolutely no tactical sense. Dr. Nexus was frantically scanning through his medical databases, searching for any known condition that could simultaneously affect 6 different species with 6 completely different physiologies. This is medically impossible. There's no known agent that could incapacitate this many different biological systems without leaving obvious traces. Commander Thane had gone very quiet, staring at the monitoring screens with the expression of someone whose fundamental understanding of cause and effect was undergoing rapid and unwelcome revision. That's when the motion detector chimed. We all turned to camera 1, focused on the trial zone's primary exit point. There, walking with the kind of casual, unhurried pace typically associated with pleasant afternoon strolls, was Zephira Blackwood. She was completely unharmed. Her uniform was slightly dusty but otherwise intact. Her equipment appeared to be functioning normally. She moved with none of the disorientation usually associated with neural disruptor exposure. In fact, she looked remarkably well rested for someone who had supposedly been unconscious for the past 20 minutes. As she approached the exit scanner, she paused, looked directly into the monitoring camera, and offered a small, polite wave, the kind of wave you might give to colleagues after completing a successful day's work. Commander, I said carefully, I think we may need to reconsider our assessment of this trial. Thane nodded slowly, his finger hovering over the emergency response protocols that suddenly seemed entirely inadequate for whatever had just occurred in our supposedly controlled testing environment. Indeed, he replied. I think we may need to reconsider quite a few things. The emergency review board convened exactly 47 minutes after what we had initially classified as technical malfunction, 7-7 Alpha, but were now hesitantly relabeling as unprecedented training incident requiring immediate analysis. I found myself seated between Commander Thane and Dr. Nexus in Conference Room Alpha, staring at holographic displays that showed our 6 unconscious instructors being carefully extracted from their various impossible locations. The medical team had confirmed what we already suspected. All 6 were healthy, uninjured, and suffering from nothing more serious than what appeared to be extremely restful sleep. Let's review the footage, announced Director Kelvash, our Academy's senior administrator, with the tone of someone who suspected this meeting was going to require significantly more caffeine than originally anticipated. The holographic replay began with our standard trial initialization sequence. There was Zephira, standing in the center clearing, looking around with what we had initially interpreted as confused bewilderment, but were now beginning to suspect might have been tactical assessment. Frame-by-frame analysis, Director Kelvish commanded, and the playback slowed to allow detailed examination of every movement. What we discovered was educational, in the most humbling possible way. That initial stumble we had all laughed at, the clumsy fall that had sent her weapon clattering across the rocks, the apparently panicked scramble behind inadequate cover, none of it had been accidental. Tactical misdirection, whispered Dr. Nexus, his voice carrying the kind of awed respect usually reserved for particularly elegant scientific theories. She deliberately created the appearance of incompetence. The footage showed Zephira's carefully calculated movements with stunning clarity once you knew what to look for. Her fall had positioned her precisely where she needed to be to observe all 6 instructor approach vectors while appearing completely helpless. Her weapon had been deliberately placed where its metallic surface would create light reflections, allowing her to track movement without direct visual contact. Even more impressively, her choice of cover had been strategically perfect, not for protection, which was what we had assumed she was attempting, but for escape routes. The boulder formation provided exactly 7 different exit paths, each leading toward optimal ambush positions. She wasn't hiding from them, Commander Thane realized, his voice carrying the kind of dawning comprehension usually associated with particularly embarrassing revelations. She was herding them. The playback continued, showing Instructor Korthak's confident advance toward what he believed was cowering prey. What the footage revealed was Zephira timing his approach with mathematical precision, waiting until his attention was focused on her supposed position before moving through terrain he couldn't observe. How did she get behind him without triggering his motion sensors? Dr. Nexus asked, leaning forward to study the tactical display. The answer was both simple and profoundly irritating. She had used Korthak's own equipment against him. Human military training apparently included detailed instruction in disabling detection systems using nothing more sophisticated than mud, vegetation, and what could only be described as excessive patience. Primitive techniques, I muttered, though the word primitive was beginning to taste less like superiority and more like professional embarrassment. The review of Instructor Vex's takedown was particularly enlightening. Our supposedly invisible Veltrani stealth expert had been neutralized using a combination of environmental awareness and what human military manuals apparently termed basic fieldcraft. Zephira had tracked Vex's position by observing subtle changes in vegetation movement, then used the instructor's own camouflage abilities against her by creating false heat signatures using reflective surfaces. She turned our stealth specialist's strengths into vulnerabilities. Director Kelvash observed with the kind of clinical fascination usually reserved for studying particularly efficient predators. And she did it using technology we discarded as obsolete approximately 3,000 years ago. The systematic elimination of all 6 instructors had taken exactly 14 minutes. 14 minutes of what we had dismissed as panicked flight and desperate hiding, but which tactical analysis revealed as a masterpiece of battlefield manipulation. Each instructor had been approached during moments when their attention was focused elsewhere. Each had been neutralized using methods specifically chosen to exploit their individual species' physiological characteristics. Korthak's four-armed coordination advantage had been turned against him using leverage techniques that worked regardless of arm count. Vex's camouflage abilities had been bypassed entirely through environmental tracking. The remaining 4 had been systematically approached and eliminated using tactics that were apparently standard curriculum in something called Special Operations Warfare. She knew exactly what she was doing from the moment the trial began, Commander Thane said slowly, reviewing footage that showed Zephira's perfectly controlled breathing patterns throughout the entire engagement. This wasn't luck. This wasn't accident. This was execution of a premeditated tactical plan. Dr. Nexus nodded, studying medical readouts that showed Zephira's heart rate remaining steady throughout encounters that should have triggered massive stress responses. Her physiological data indicates she was never in any real danger. She was confident, completely absolutely confident. The most galling discovery came when we analyzed the neural disruptor that had supposedly eliminated her. Instructor Korthak had indeed fired the weapon. The discharge had been properly calibrated for human physiology. The targeting had been accurate. Unfortunately, he had fired it at a dummy constructed from vegetation and tactical gear, positioned precisely where Zephira had been standing 4 minutes earlier. She played dead, I said, the words emerging with the kind of flat disbelief that accompanies complete tactical humiliation. She constructed a decoy, allowed the instructor to believe he had eliminated her, then continued operating while we all assumed the trial was over. Director Kelvish closed the tactical analysis with an expression that suggested our Academy's reputation for producing the galaxy's finest military minds might require some immediate and significant recalibration. "Gentlemen," he announced, "I think we need to completely reassess our understanding of human military capabilities." The formal acknowledgement of Zephira's victory required exactly 17 different forms, 3 interdepartmental reviews, and 1 very uncomfortable conversation with the Galactic Defense Academy's board of directors, who had apparently never needed to create documentation for Recruit Defeat's entire instructor staff using techniques our computers don't recognize. I found myself staring at Form 807C, which demanded a detailed explanation of how a single recruit had achieved total tactical superiority over Academy-certified instructors. The available response options included categories like superior firepower, advanced technology, and enhanced physiological capabilities. None of them included used sticks and mud to embarrass the finest military minds in 7 galaxies. Commander Thane was having similar difficulties with his official incident report. How exactly do I explain to Command that our elite training staff was systematically neutralized by someone who hasn't even figured out energy weapons yet? Dr. Nexus looked up from his medical evaluation forms with the expression of someone who had just discovered that his advanced degree in xenobiology was significantly less advanced than he had previously believed. I could classify it as a case study in species-specific tactical adaptation. That might sound better than admitting we completely misunderstood what humans are capable of. The real challenge came when we had to actually face Zephira herself. Academy protocol required a formal debriefing session with successful trial candidates, where we typically discussed their performance, identified areas for improvement, and outlined their future training progression. Somehow, phrases like areas for improvement seemed less relevant when discussing someone who had just demonstrated that our entire understanding of combat tactics might be approximately 3,000 years out of. Zephira entered the debriefing room with the same calm demeanor she had maintained throughout the entire trial. She sat down across from our review panel, folded her hands in her lap, and waited with the kind of patient attention usually associated with students expecting to receive helpful guidance from their instructors. "Miss Blackwood," Director Kelvish began carefully, "your trial performance was unexpected." "Thank you," she replied politely, as if accepting a compliment about her choice of uniform rather than acknowledgement that she had single-handedly redefined Academy training protocols. "Perhaps you could explain your tactical approach," Commander Thane suggested, his voice carrying the kind of forced casualness that indicated he was desperately hoping to understand how his carefully designed trial had been so thoroughly dismantled. Zephira tilted her head slightly, considering the question. Basic reconnaissance, target assessment, environmental utilization, and sequential engagement. Standard operating procedure for asymmetric warfare scenarios. The words hung in the air like technical specifications written in a language we thought we understood, but apparently didn't. Standard operating procedure, I repeated slowly, for your species. For anyone facing superior numbers with technological disadvantages, she clarified helpfully. The instructors' overconfidence in their equipment and abilities created exploitable vulnerabilities. Once I identified their individual tactical patterns, neutralization became relatively straightforward. Dr. Nexus made a note that probably read something like human definition of straightforward, requires immediate academic study. The conversation continued for another hour, during which Zephira explained her methods with the kind of patient thoroughness usually associated with teachers helping particularly slow students understand basic concepts. She described techniques that human military forces had apparently been using for centuries, tactical principles that seemed blindingly obvious once explained, and strategic thinking that our computers were still trying to categorize. By the time we finished the debriefing, several things had become abundantly clear. First, human military science was significantly more sophisticated than we had assumed. Second, our Academy's training protocols needed immediate and comprehensive revision. Third, underestimating species based on their technological development was probably the kind of mistake that ended civilization. Zephira left the debriefing room with her new academy assignment, Advanced Tactical Instruction, with a recommendation for immediate placement in our elite command training program. As the door closed behind her, Commander Thane leaned back in his chair with the expression of someone whose worldview had just been systematically disassembled and rebuilt using superior engineering principles. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "maybe we should start taking application letters more seriously." I nodded, already composing my report to the Galactic Defense Council. Subject line: urgent revision of species assessment protocols required immediately. Because apparently the universe's most dangerous military tacticians were the ones we had been dismissing as primitive, and they had been laughing at us the entire time.